This Saturday in late September 2006 was a day to mix the old and the new, period costumes and digital cameras. The crowd was here to greet the return of the men who had retraced the journey of the Lewis and Clark expedition, which had triumphantly, amazingly made it back to St. Louis 200 years ago to the day. The reenactors were as historically accurate as possible. The day and the time, perhaps even the place of the landing, the boats, the outfits. And if you were one of the St. Louisans who had pretty much stopped thinking about Lewis and Clark since we gave them the big send-off more than 2 years ago, well, that's kind of historically accurate as well.
Everybody had more or less forgotten about them. There had been no news from them since the spring of 1804. So it had been 2 years since any word had been heard from them. Everybody had kind of given them up for lost. They had stopped in St. Charles, and so word had gotten down to St. Louis that they were coming, and so a huge crowd gathered on the riverfront in order to welcome them home. And the way Clark tells it, the men in the boats fired off their guns as a salute to the city. And then, as Sergeant Ordway mentions, the people on the bank responded with 3 cheers. And so that was the extent of the ceremony that happened when they actually arrived. The news traveled all over the country like lightning. It was huge news. They were the equivalent of celebrities today. Everybody realized it was a big story, that it was important. Everybody was tremendously interested in it. But the problem was nobody really knew why it was important.
After all, they hadn't found what they were looking for, that easy northwest passage to the Pacific, but only because it's not there. But they did come back with all kinds of important knowledge about this new part of the United States and the scientific information that Thomas Jefferson had asked for. But people 200 years ago were a lot like us. They liked adventure, and that story pushed the other practical accomplishments aside.
This document is the prospectus that Lewis issued for the book that he intended to write about the expedition. And the book never got written, but this prospectus describes the book in great detail, and it really shows how Lewis thought about his legacy. There were going to be 3 volumes. Each one was going to be 400 to 500 pages long, but only the first part of the first volume was going to be the adventure story. The rest was going to be about mineralogy and zoology and botany and geopolitics and commerce. I'm sure this would have been a very valuable book, but it really would not have sold very well. The book that eventually got written after Lewis's death focused entirely on the adventure story and left out all of the science. In fact, it wasn't until 1904 that people really realized that they had done any science.
The difference between a historic event and the celebration of a historic event is that we always know how this is going to turn out. We knew they'd be back and when they'd be back. And this time the city was prepared. This time Lewis and Clark would have something they had never had before, a monument. Not a grand symbol of westward expansion, but something more literal, more personal. Even before the Lewis and Clark reenactors had set out, the idea for a riverfront statue was in the works, and its completion would take nearly as long as the journey. It was the work of sculptor Harry Weber and his crew of craftsmen led by 2 Russians, who took Weber's original model and turned it into a bronze monument, casting it piece by piece in Weber's Soulard studio. And with only weeks before the dedication, they were putting those pieces together. The week before the big riverfront event, it was time to move the statue, now in just 2 pieces, out of the studio and to the granite base on the riverfront. It was the first time Weber's creation had seen the light of day.
The actual making of this statue was about an 18-month process, and it's been almost uninterrupted for 18 months. We figured there's about 7,500 man-hours involved in making it.
On a morning like this, do you sort of feel like Lewis and Clark at the end of a long journey?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I do. It's very close to that feeling. One of the things I tried to get in Lewis's face, I think, is that even though it was a success, the recognition that it was at an end gave him mixed feelings. That I think he was a little bit sad as well as triumphant. Not that I feel triumphant, but I am a little bit sad almost that this is coming to an end, because it's been a very satisfying long journey.
To you and the people of St. Louis, the captain's return.